Hey, welcome back. Gonna make hopefully a short little video here with with all the talk about the JFK files and the Epstein files. I really feel led to talk about 9/11, um, which was a clear inside job. I don't believe we're ever going to get the whole picture of what went on in any of this stuff. The bad guys have had a long time, a lot of ability and a lot of motivation to scrub a lot of the pertinent information. I don't think we're ever going to hear the worst of it, but I'm going to give it a shot. I'd like to say, first of all, that I am in really good health and not suicidal. Not that I'm a very important person. I know that the camera, and I'm not very good at the camera, it makes me kind of look like the undead. I've had people ask me if I was dying. No, I don't really look like I'm dying. It's just I'm not very good at the camera. Face it, I'm not all that photogenic to begin with. But as far as 9/11 goes, there was a lot of important people that made money off of insurance, off the stock market, and the resulting nonsensical wars that followed the so-called terrorist attack. So I'm just going to go through a little of the information, not a deep dive, but we're just going to touch on some things which proves that this was an inside job. I'd like to start with the attack on the Pentagon. If you've ever driven by the Pentagram, that is a very congested urban area. It's a lot of urban congestion. It is one of the most surveilled buildings in the world. I'm sure they have air attack security. I'm sure they have. There's a lot of cameras, a lot of satellites looking at that building, a lot of people in the vicinity. And yet, I've never, in all these years, I've never heard of or seen one witness that ever saw a plane crash into the building. I've never seen one photo image of a plane ever crash into the building. Now, these so-called terrorists that hijacked these jet planes, from the news reports, they were invited here, they were trained here, but they weren't competent to fly Cessnas. Now, you're going to hijack a very sophisticated large jet plane, and you're going to do high-speed, low-level maneuvers around a very congested urban area and bullseye the pentagram, and nobody sees it. I would doubt that a very experienced pilot could accomplish that, let alone guys that were not competent to fly. Now, if you remember the TV footage of what happened after that the jet plane hit the pentagram, originally there was a very small circular hole put in the building. I've been told it was 18 feet in diameter, and eventually some collapse occurred. So this jet plane that supposedly hit the Pentagon was a Boeing 757. It had a wingspan just under 125 feet. Supposedly 64 people on board. Yet it crashes into the Pentagon and puts a small circular hole and a small fire. Now, the fire wasn't small to the people that were on the receiving end, but as far as a big jet plane crashing, the lawn wasn't burnt. How does a plane with a 125-foot wingspan put a small circular hole in the Pentagon and disappear? There was no wreckage. There was no luggage. There were no bodies. Now, I had in my garage for a long time a worn-out jet plane tire. I weighed the thing before I picked it up. It was 270 pounds. So you can imagine how big and how heavy a wheel on a jet plane is, let alone a lot of wheels, let alone the humongous engines. And yet that plane, that invisible plane that nobody saw, nobody photographed, disappeared. You will recall lines of people walking along the grass in front of the Pentagon looking for debris. And I believe they found one small wheel and a little rumpled metal. No plane. Okay, that didn't happen. We had air defense jets, which just seemed to be vacant, busy at the time. Nothing came to shoot it down. I'm here to tell you that a plane did not hit the Pentagon. We'd have seen one picture, one witness. We would have seen debris. We would have seen dead bodies. We would have seen luggage. Nothing. Invisible. We were told that United Airlines Flight 93 was heroically taken over by passengers. We were seeing cell phone messages from the plane that was flying through the air at breakneck speed. That didn't happen. And it supposedly crashed in a field outside of 84, Pennsylvania. Now, there was a hole in the ground in that field. Unfortunately for the narrative, that small hole in the ground pre-existed the crash. And again, there was no wreckage. After some digging, we were told that somebody found a small engine near the crash site. But there was no wreckage. There was no plane. There were no bodies. Another invisible plane. As far as the Twin Towers goes, there was American Airlines Flight 11, we're told, with 92 people. United Flight 175 with 64 people on board. We saw on the television planes flying into the Twin Towers. And what did these planes do? They disappeared into the Twin Towers like these were the world's tallest Venus flytrap. They disappeared. Now, these towers were built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds and jet plane impact. We had 747s flying around long before this, and these planes were much bigger than the planes which supposedly crashed into the Twin Towers. If you look closely at the TV, or is it CGI footage of these planes, they don't look real. And they don't look anything like these passenger planes that allegedly ran into the towers. Now, these towers were strongly constructed, thousands and thousands of enormous steel beams and concrete. There's no plane in the world that could run into the side of that building and disappear. It would have bounced off, it would have fallen to the ground, there would have been wreckage all over the place. What we did see was an initial explosion and then a small smoky fire. Now, the fire and explosion wouldn't have been small to the people on the receiving end, but compared to a real jet plane explosion, that small smoky fire was supposed to have been so intense that it melted the steel beams and the building collapsed on itself. That is not possible. The laws of physics preclude that. There was a lot of black smoke pouring from those buildings because the fire was not hot. It was oxygen starved. It was not a hot fire. Now, no modern skyscraper has ever collapsed due to fire. And there's been some spectacular skyscraper fires. They burned like Roman candles for a long time. Yes, you can soften steel with a jet fuel crash. You cannot melt steel with basically a fuel oil fire. I took a tour at the site some years back, and there was an obnoxious woman with a very obnoxious New York accent describing to us that, well, these steel beams were wrapped in fireproof material. But the fireproof material caught fire. And, well, the ensuing fire was so hot that it melted those steel beams, and blam, down goes the building. If you look at the footage of the building collapse in slow motion, and if you listen to witnesses who were on the scene, they described a series of explosions. You can watch the floors blowing out underneath the building, boom, 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 like a demolition. And the top of the buildings were falling, they were free falling at the speed of gravity. Minus a little air resistance. That shows me the building, that the hot beams did not collapse and the building pancaked on itself. There would have been resistance, it would have toppled over. It could not have collapsed straight down as in a demolition. This was a demolition. Building 7, we saw there was a small fire in Building 7. It wasn't impacted by anything else, and that building just up and collapsed. And it just so happened that the Twin Towers collapsed in sections where the 50-foot steel beams snapped off, loaded onto flatbed trucks, and sold to the Chinese. Nothing to see here, folks. You know, the crime scene has been cleaned up. Underneath that collapse was an enormous amount of heat, molten metal, and little beams of iron oxide. That sounds to me like military-grade thermite. I am not an expert, but there were explosives used in those buildings which brought it down. A jet crash could not have done it. We look at February 26, 1993. It's an amazing occurrence. There was a terrorist by the name of Ramzi Youssef, we are told, that tried to collapse the North Tower into the South Tower. There was a truck bomb that went into the parking garage and went off. 6 were killed, over 1,000 injured. And there was a whole list of so-called terrorists with Islamic names, and I don't doubt it, involved in the plot. Interestingly, there was a former Egyptian military man by the name of Ahmad Salem. I can't pronounce it. He was an FBI informant. We are told that he informed the FBI of this plot ahead of time, and that the FBI was initially planning to supply the bomb maker with inert bomb supplies. But kaboom, the bomb went off anyway. The tower didn't come down. That was under the Clinton administration. 9/11 occurred under the Bush administration. Amazingly, on W's desk landed the Patriot Act. It's about yay thick. I don't know that anybody had read anything yay thick, but he signed that into law just on the heels of 9/11, and which turned every American citizen into a terrorist. It began the terrorist state, the surveillance state in this country, and we've never recovered from that.